We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 13a. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah is discussing Pigul. Again, Pigul is a situation where one is performing the avodos of the carbon, let's say the carbon mincha, with intention to consume the carbon outside of the proper time. And consumption can refer to the consumption of the carbon by the Mizbeach, or it can refer to the consumption of the carbon by people. And the Mishnah said that we cannot be mitzdareh if we cannot combine together intentions. So let's say there was intention for a half a zayis, which is not the requisite amount. The requisite amount is a kazayas. So let's say there was an intention for a half a zayas lechol and a half a zayas lahaktir. That's a half a zayas to eat the carbon by people and a half a zayas to burn the carbon on the mizbeach. That will not combine in order to render that a machshava of pigul and in order to render the carbon into pigul. And the Gemara said on the previous summit that we can infer from the Mishnah. Let's say we would want to combine lechol davar shedarko lechol and lechol davar she'ein darko lechol. Let's say a person would have intention to eat a part of the carbon which is normally eaten. Let's say half a zayas of that, and then to eat a part of the carbon which really is not normally eaten, but is normally burned on the mizbeach. Apparently that would be mitzdarif. It's only lechol or lahaktir that's not mitzdarif, but lechol and lechol, even if it's a davar she'ein darko lechol, apparently would be mitzdarif. And the Gemara asked on that from the previous Mishnah, which implied otherwise. And the Gemara first answered that our Mishnah is following Rabbi Eliezer, that mechashrin me'achilas adam lachilas mizbeach, one can have intention from achilas adam, from something that's going to be eaten by people, instead have machshava for achilas mizbeach, for the consumption of the mizbeach, and vice versa. And then the Gemara said that one can even say that our Mishnah is following the Rabbanan, and it's just that we're drawing the wrong inference from the Mishnah. The real inference to draw from the Mishnah is that a machshava of chutz l'zamano and a machshava of chutz l'menkomo, those two machshavas can combine. But then the Gemara asked, that really we already learned from the earlier Mishnah, so that cannot be the point of this Mishnah. And the Gemara continues and says, Hasulamali, and so therefore what do we need this Mishnah for? Ilechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol. Again, if you're going to say it's that we can combine something that normally is eaten with something that normally is not eaten, kamash malon de mitzdaref, that it's teaching us that we can combine those two. May reisha shemat mina, but again, as we already said from the beginning of the Mishnah, we already see not like that. As Rashi explains, lamali, what do we need this Mishnah for? Ilameidak minoha lechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol. Again, if it's to make the inference that we can combine something that normally is eaten with something that normally is not eaten, machshava on those two parts of the carbon, could go in lechol chatzi zayas shirayim. For example, he has in mind to eat a half a zayas of the remainder which normally is eaten, again outside the proper time, v'lechol chatzi zayas kometz, and then to eat a half a zayas of the kometz which normally is not eaten, the mitzdarfen. And again, that's what the Mishnah is saying, that combines. Hamei reisha shamat mina de lo mitzdarfen. Again, we already learned from the earlier part of the Mishnah that they do not combine. To katani reisha, as we said in the previous summit, it says in the earlier Mishnah, davar shedarko lechol in, she'ein darko lechol lo. It only applies by something that's normally eaten, not by something that is not normally eaten. And so therefore that cannot be what the inference of the Mishnah is. That can't be what the Mishnah is teaching. And the Gemara continues, ilechol ulahaktir, and if it's teaching us lechol ulahaktir, and Rashi explains, ilechol ulahaktir kolomar dehu gufei asal ashminan, maybe the Mishnah is teaching us what actually is in the Mishnah. De'ein achila v'haktara mitzdarfin, that achila and haktara, eating by people, intention in terms of the people eating, and intention in terms of burning on the mizbeach, the consumption of the mizbeach, that those are not mitzdarif. So that already midiyuka dereisha shamat mina, that actually we also already know from the inference of the earlier part of the Mishnah. Rashi explains, hamidukya dereisha shamat mina mididaikinan mereisha, we can infer from the earlier part of the Mishnah, davar shein darko lechol, that if it's something that's not normally eaten, im chichav lechol chatzi zayis shirayim v'chatzi zayis kometz l'machar, if he has in mind to eat a half zayis, the remainder which is eaten, and a half zayis kometz which is not, tomorrow outside the proper time, lo have a machshava. Once we say that's not a machshava, so kol shekain the lechol chatzi zayis shirayim ulahaktir chatzi zayis kometz dein mitzdarfen. Certainly if he has in mind to eat a half zayis of the remainder and to burn a half zayis of the kometz, certainly that will not combine, and so therefore that's obvious as well. Again, midiyuka dereisha shamat mina, don't we already know that from the inference of the beginning of the Mishnah? The hashta, because now malechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol amrit lo mitzdaref, if we're already saying to eat and to eat something that's not normally eaten, that doesn't combine. So lechol ulahaktir miboy, do we even need to say to eat and to burn? Those are totally separate. Why should those combine? And the Gemara says, no, our Mishnah actually is necessary. In yes, lechol ulahaktir tzrichale, it's necessary to teach that lechol and lahaktir do not combine. Because one might have thought, hasam hu, over there, where it's a davar shein darko lechol, delo, there doesn't combine, the low-key orche kamachashiv, because he's not thinking of the normal way that it, again, is intended for this particular kometz, let's say. By the kometz, it's normally burned on the mizbeach, and he's thinking to eat it. That's not even the normal thing to do with it. Aval hacha, but over here, devahai orche kamachashiv, uvahai orche kamachashiv, where he's thinking what is normal to do with it. He's thinking that a half a zayis, which is supposed to be eaten, he's going to eat outside the proper time, and a half a zayis, which is supposed to be burned, he's going to burn outside the proper time. So, Eimal, it's if one might think they do combine, kamash malon, that's what our Mishnah is teaching us, that in that case as well, they do not combine. Hadran aloch kol ha-menachos, we will return to you, parak kol ha-menachos. This is the end of the first parak of Meseches Menachos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe, and take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel, and we will now begin the second parak of Meseches Menachos. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, HaKometz es ha-mincha, if somebody takes the fistful from a karban mincha, lechol shira o lahaktir komza, to eat the remainder of the karban mincha, which is the part that is generally eaten, or to burn the kometz of the mincha, which is the part that is burned, lamachar, tomorrow, so it's outside of the proper time. Says the Mishnah, Moder Rabbi Yossi Bazer, Rabbi Yossi admits in this case, shehu pigol, that it is pigol, v'chayav all of kares, and there is a liability of kares. But the Mishnah continues, lahaktir levonto lamachar, let's say he has in mind, when he takes the kometz of the mincha to burn the levona, to burn its frankincense the next day, outside of the proper time. So there we have a machlokes tanoim, Rabbi Yossi Omer Pasal Vein Bo Kares. Rabbi Yossi says it is disqualified, but there's no kares in that case. It doesn't turn the carbon into pigol, that if you would partake from that carbon, there would be kares. V'chachamim omrim pigol, and the chachamim say no, it is pigol in that case. V'chayav all of kares, and there is a liability of kares. Amru lo, they said to him, meaning they said to Rabbi Yossi, the chachamim said to Rabbi Yossi, Mashino zem min hazevach. How is this different than a carbon, than an animal carbon? Amar lohen, he said to them, Shazevach, when it comes to a slaughtered carbon, Damo uvesaru ve'emurav, its blood and its flesh, or its meat, and its emurav, which is the sacrificial portions, echod, they are all considered one. They're all one and the same. Ulavona ena min hamincha, but the lavona, the frankincense, is separate from the carbon mincha. So in other words, if one were to take the kamitza and have in mind to lahaktir levonta, to burn the levona the next day, the levona is considered to be a separate entity, and therefore Rabbi Yossi says that's why it's not pigul in that case. It is disqualified, but it's not pigul, and so therefore there is no kares. That is not the same when it comes to a zevach. When it comes to a zevach, damo, besaro, emurav, they're all considered to be like one, and so therefore it's possible, for example, at the time of the zrika, you have in mind that the basar is going to be eaten tomorrow. That would be a situation of pigul. It's all considered in the same category. And the Gemara says, Lomali lemisna moder Rabbi Yossi bazu. Why does the beginning of the Mishnah, which has a classic case of pigul, why does it say that Rabbi Yossi admits in this case that it's pigul? And the Gemara answers, Mishum the Kaboy lemisna seifa. The reason why it phrases it in that fashion, it doesn't simply say that Rabbi Yossi says that, is because the Mishnah is about to say at the end, lahakte levonta lamacher, the case where he has in mind to burn the levona the next day. Rabbi Yossi Omer Pasal Vein Bo Kares. There Rabbi Yossi argues and says it's disqualified and there's no kares, and the Chacham again say it's pigul and there is kares. And so Mao the Tema, what might you have said? Time of the Rabbi Yossi Mishum the Kasavar Ein Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir. Maybe the reason of Rabbi Yossi is because there's no pigul when it's just half of the matir. Now, in a case of a karban mincha, both the kometz and the levona are the matir, and so therefore you might say in a situation where it's chatzi matir, let's say he takes the kometz al menas lahaktir komtza lamachar, with the intention of burning the kometz the next day. The kometz is only half the matir, and maybe that's the real reason of Rabbi Yossi, and maybe Rabbi Yossi would argue over there as well, because there is no pigul by chatzi matir. Ve'afilu reisha nami, even in the reisha, even in the first case, one might think that Rabbi Yossi argues. That's why it says Mod Rabbi Yossi bazeh. In this case, Rabbi Yossi admits it's only in a situation where you're taking the kometz of the mincha and having in mind for the levona, which is a separate entity. That's where Rabbi Yossi argues and says there's no pigul. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis.